so weird. Okay.
Did it work?
I think it worked. Okay. Well, hey, what's up, beautiful jellyfish? It's Tracy.
Hey, I'm Chuck.
This is my friend Chuck, who is featured in his Tesa EDH deck tech. Also, I'm mirrored right now, so I'm like on. It's really jank. I feel like I'm facing a really awkward angle, but I don't really know how to fix it. So here we are. But we're in a little bit of a different location. We're actually in the office of me just saying, damn, I have a really fancy mic in front of me and all this wonderful, lovely stuff behind me and some magic card stuff there.
This is where I work.
Yeah, so this is where Chuck works. But I wanted to film this video because I had filmed a video previously on like power levels in EDH, and then you had mentioned something to me which I thought was really interesting, because you had mentioned like I had an infinite combo in my Tassiger deck, and you were like, I think it's really interesting that you took that out. Like, I have a lot of respect for people who do that, and it kind of got me thinking. I was like, it'd be so interesting to talk about power levels, because you and I have totally different power levels in EDH, and we're still friends, and we still like to play Magic together, and I think it's really interesting. So, like, what's your kind of take on, like, how do you think people measure power levels? Like, how do you measure power levels as a Magic player?
So, there's actually a lot of argument over this exact topic.
Yeah.
A lot of people put decks into two categories, casual and competitive. And there's been a lot of people that have attempted to quantify just what exactly a competitive deck is, what it means, what it does. And in my personal opinion, I think a competitive deck can either win or lock the game down by the third turn.
That's your definition.
That's my definition.
Someone was like, what would you define as a really competitive deck?
Yeah.
That's what you think of.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's my definition.
Okay.
A lot of people say, no, it's the fourth turn, but I mean, at the end of the day, it's just everybody's opinion.
Okay.
So
then when you build a deck, do you do that? Do you try to do that? Okay.
Well, it depends. So I enjoy all kinds of Magic, competitive, casual, and if I'm building a competitive deck, I'm going to build it to win on the third turn if I can.
Okay.
And so,
see, what I think is really interesting that you're saying people can put them into two different buckets. And when you think about it, it's really not like that. It's more of a range, right? And I think that's what's really interesting. And I think, and I don't know if you do this as well, it doesn't sound like it, but in our friend group, we say, what is our power level? And we go on a scale of 1 to 10. Mm-hmm. And like, there's a lot of issues with that too, right? Mm-hmm. Because then you have like, you're thinking, okay, it's a little bit better than just casual or competitive, but like, that's like, your 10 and my 10 could look totally different.
That's very true. Yeah.
Yeah. So where would you put all of your decks on like a 10, or would you no? You have a range of
so
things.
Since being a person that enjoys all type of Magic, all types of different kinds of decks, if a group of people sit down and they're like, we want to play tier 1 fast competitive combo Magic, I can do that. But that's actually very rare. Like, that's why I play in a Commander League. I go there to do that. I don't bust that deck out to play with, a bunch of regular people, or people that don't want to do that. And so I will normally play like a 5 to 6 if I'm here at the shop and people just want to play some Commander.
Okay.
And I build decks that I think are fun. And so I care more about that than I do. I'm not a spike,
Yeah.
I happen to have fun while I play combo decks. I think it's fun, but only if I'm playing against other people that are, playing combo decks that are going to win real fast.
So what it sounds like to me, and what I'm hearing is, if you busted out a deck like that against me and my play group, it doesn't sound like you would be having as much fun, because you're playing a deck that's on a totally different power level compared to us, and it's not fun for us too. So I think it's interesting, but I think some people don't care about that though. Some people only care to win in every type of situation, so they don't care about the levels of play.
It's an ugly side of humanity, I'm afraid, and it manifests itself in different communities. But it's egotistical to be that way, and to think that you get a feather in your cap for bullying people is a problem. But if me and a group of strangers all agree to play at, tier 1 level, and I get my tier 1 deck and I find out that they didn't mean the same thing, I feel bad about it. I feel bad about it. And also I don't have fun because I enjoy like the struggle that is a game of Commander. I enjoy interaction. I enjoy going back and forth with somebody. I enjoy, the challenge of playing against different people at the table, and if I just win on turn 3, it's not fun. You know, like I'm here to socialize and have fun with people, you know.
But what I'm hearing is you said that you had mentioned that there's a time and place for that. You have
There
that.
is,
You
yep.
have that
I
space
do
with your
have that.
commander league,
Yep.
and you kind of get your fix for that out.
Yeah.
And I think some people take that, and that's like their commander all the time. It's
Yeah.
like that version of that competitive level, and it's like that's not fun for a lot of people. And I think when a lot of people, especially with like Commander 2020 announcements, which I just filmed a video on, is like it sounds like they're opening it up to a lot more people, I think, in a lot more spaces, which I think is really interesting. So yeah, I just think it's really interesting. I kind of also like mentioned in like my notes that I think having like building a variety of decks with like people in mind is a really, really good idea. And I wanted to share the story actually. So I had been playing EDH with a new person who's totally new to the game. And he was like, so I was playing with like him and then Paul and then some other person. And it was like, he was so new. So his deck was obviously not refined or anything like that. Like totally understandable, like just gotten into it. And we were like, oh, like looking at my stack of decks and being like, oh my goodness, like I don't have anything. And I felt like really in that moment, I was like, oh my God, like I'm not being like, oh, my decks are super competitive and super amazing and they don't win on turn 3, but they're a lot more like competitive than that. So I think it's really interesting, and I think it's just the point that I think I was really trying to get in this video is like it's so difficult to determine like what someone's version of competitive looks like, and I think all those different things look so different for so many people, really. And it was in that moment, it was really interesting because I was like, oh my God, like what do I do? And like doing anything powerful was like, oh no, I'm just drawing 7 cards. Like, but it just looked like it was such a crazy powerful thing, which some people was like, psh, it's only powerful if you draw 10 cards, like, you know, things like that. So, yeah, what else did I kind of write? Oh, yeah, the infinite combo thing I really wanted to talk to you about. When you talk about your version of a competitive deck, that turn 3 idealistic win, that has infinite combo every time?
Not necessarily.
Okay.
Yeah, I think combo decks are their own thing.
Okay.
But I think, you know, like killing everybody with infect isn't necessarily an infinite combo, you know. And
yeah, no.
And if you can pull that off by turn 3, which is possible in Commander, you have
Yeah.
access to so many different cards. I would say that is still considered competitive without necessarily being infinite.
That's a good point. I think when I think of what a version of competitive deck looks like, I think it's kind of similar to what you were saying, that sort of locking out, like that sort of I don't even know what you'd call it, like a death in taxes kind of.
Yeah.
Is that like a sort of like approach that you're kind of thinking of?
So I used to play Bant Derevi.
Yeah.
Okay. And that was a competitive deck, even though there were 0 infinite combos in it, because I could lock down the game real fast.
Yeah.
I had a turn 1 where I flashed in Academy Rector, sacrificed it, put Omniscience on the battlefield, and then cast Decree of Silence and Solemnity for free from my hand on turn 1. And so that was just like, yep, no one's doing anything, you know. Nobody can cast spells, and that was on turn 1. And that was the only time I've ever won a game of Magic on turn 1 out of the tens of thousands of Magic games that I've played.
And also, too, one thing that I think is interesting is, like, consistency. So I think, like, that's something that people factor in as well into, like, determining how competitive a deck is. Because I think consistency is, as I'm realizing, is probably one of the most important things in a deck. Is your deck can be great, and you could have, like, one infinite combo that once you get it, it's unstoppable. But if you can't get it consistently, like, does it really matter? Like,
that's a good point.
Yeah.
That is a good point. Consistency is a thing, and that is definitely taken into consideration when people grade a deck. You know, can it reliably win on turn 3 is the question.
Yeah.
So,
And when you think about Commander, that's really interesting is that there's 100 cards. So it's like there's no sort of repetitive versus a format like Modern or something where you can run 4 of a card and you get your combos off a little bit easier than in Commander.
Yeah.
What would you say puts those like what cards are needed if someone is listening to this and they're like, I want to do that turn 3, like where would be your recommendations for people? Okay, sorry. The screen turned black and I thought we stopped recording. So what would be your recommendations? Like where would people go to look for that if they're like, oh, I don't like this aspect of casual Commander, I want something really competitive, what would you recommend to them?
So there's a lot of useful information online. There's competitive Commander decks readily available for you to look at online. But I will say, if you absolutely want to build competitive Commander decks, one, you're going to need some startup money, and two, you're going to want to play with a lot of tutors, because that's what really makes Commander decks, fast. Usually, is the ability to search your library for the card or cards you need to create the win that you're trying to get real early in the game. So definitely, if you really want to do that, invest in a lot of tutors. Demonic, Vampiric, Enlightened, Mystical. Just go grab as many as you can and find the strategy you want to play and stuff a bunch of tutors in your deck. And so, yeah.
Yeah, I think that's another reality of Magic that I don't think everyone wants to realize is it does cost money, and if you are someone who is all of my friends are doing this one thing and I am just not there, that can be really frustrating, and a lot of people, and I've definitely been in that situation, and it was not fun for me, and again, it was probably fun for those people, but I just definitely not having a good time because power levels were just nowhere near on the same plane, and it was really frustrating, and I think no one was oh, you should do X, Y, and Z to tweak your decks or anything like that. And then I also think too, the things that I think those people would want me to do are not me. They're cards that I would not have wanted to play with, and they're infinite combos that I didn't want to do. And it felt like when I'm building a deck, I want this to be a representation of who I am, and I don't want to have to change that so that I can win on turn 4. That's just yeah.
It's funny. I sometimes will write articles about Magic and Commander gameplay and things like that. And my last article, which I wrote and then immediately deleted on accident, so that was fun. But my last article I wrote was How to Stop CEDH Players. And the title of it was Confessions of a Competitive Magic Player. And the whole article was a list of budget cards that you could buy and put in your decks that will stop or slow down CEDH players, because that's probably the number one question that gets asked on the page that I admin on Facebook, is that what am I supposed to do about the competitive player in our play group? We can never stop him or her or them from doing what they want to do, and it's demoralizing, and the game you love doesn't seem so great anymore. And so I wrote this entire article with a list of budget cards that you can put in your deck that will slow down or stop CEDH players and basically give you a fighting chance. And so I think that people would really benefit, because I think that it's easy to fall into this thought trap that you have to do what other people are doing if you want to compete. And the fact is you don't have to do what other people are doing. You can focus your deck on being disruptive instead of proactive, and if you know you're going into a CEDH game, there's nothing wrong with that strategy. Your cards are not going to be dead cards. CEDH players do the same 3 or 4 things every game, and there are ways to stop them that are affordable. Pithing Needle, $1 or $2, that will stop a lot of people. Eidolon of whatever, draw only one card per turn.
The white card, yeah.
The white card. I can't remember all of them right offhand.
Great Rebel.
The new card, Deafening Silence, that completely hoses a lot of CEDH decks. And so I do a lot of that. I coach people on how to basically stop me and other people from just doing whatever they want. And so where there's a will, there's a way, and it doesn't necessarily have to cost a lot of money.
I totally agree with you. I mean, even as you were listing a card like Swords to Plowshare, is so cheap, and you're you could totally run that card, and that's
absolutely.
Path to Exile is still really great. I run both because I can, but and that's why I do those budget type of decks, and counterspells, for example, you can get counterspells that are 2 mana that are cheap. I think there's definitely options, and I think I'm glad that you brought up removal, because honestly, I remember Logan actually, who was dude, I'm so y'all started coming, and then people were oh, Tracy runs removal, and y'all I am known for that. People are always just oh, Tracy has a board. I'm like, it's a joke in our group. Like,
Yeah.
oh, Tracy has a removal spell. Like, it's who I am, and that's like, I'm kind of glad that I'm known for that, because then I psych people out with it. It's great. People are like, oh, you're representing psychotic groups, and I'm not at all, which was hilarious.
I've played against Tracy, and I know that I have to do something or I'm gonna die, you know? And yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah. No, and it's cool. And I remember Logan saying, I don't remember exactly the wording he used, but he was like, before y'all, like, not a lot of people here were running as much removal. And it's like, and he's like, it kind of got frustrating because it's like people would be like complaining, like, you're running all these things, and it's like, well, run removal. And it's like, again, I when I say that, I don't mean like if you're playing in a competitive, really, really competitive sense. I mean, I think you have to kind of like know that going into it. But yeah, removal is like everything, and various types of removal. I think like that I hit on that in, I don't remember, one of my videos, and I was just like, you need a variety. You need artifact removal, enchantment removal, creature removal, board wipes. Like, you need all of those things, and I think some people miss out on that. Removal packages are so important.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I'm trying to think if there's anything. Oh yeah, I guess like the last point that I wanted to make is like, you kind of mentioned like playing to win. Like, you, when you build a deck, like, you obviously play to win, and that sounds like really typical. Like, you build a deck, like, you want to win with it. Like, yeah,
course,
okay, that's like,
I mean, that's the
like,
ultimate
that's
goal.
a given. Yeah.
All right, continue.
Do you want to make a guest appearance in my video?
Richard. Do it.
Richard, owner of Major Sanctum, want to make a guest appearance?
Yep.
On the
There he
video.
is.
We're filming. This is
There
Richard,
he
owner
is.
of Major Sanctum. He's
How
really
handsome
cool.
he is.
That was your 2 seconds of fame.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we were talking about like playing to win versus like playing to like have fun, and also like I wrote like building a deck with like intention, and so I think like some people, like, that's one flaw in deck building that you can see is someone like kind of has stuff that's like all over the place, and like I mentioned this in like a video a while back, like some people try to do too many things. They try to like do so much synergy, like it's like they're like, I saw this one tip and it was one of the best things I read. It was like, don't assume that you're gonna have X card in your hand and X card in your hand at the same time. And like, it's a little bit different in Commander when you can tutor for things, but like, I think that's really important, is like, I'm only gonna run these 2 cards with synergy, and like, it's not an infinite combo. Do you know what I'm talking about? And like, people assume they'll have it, and it's like, they're never gonna have it. So that, I think like building a deck with like knowing what you want to do and like how you're gonna kill people, and like multiple ways of doing that, because someone might just stop your main thing. And I think that's do you find like people who do play those competitive decks, if you disrupt them, how easily can they bounce back from it?
It depends. A lot of people can't bounce back very well.
Interesting.
However, there are levels of competitive play, and somebody that's been playing competitively for a long time, and somebody who also might be just really smart, will know how to accommodate for removal, and their play style will be resilient. They will be able to continue to go even in the face of opposition. And so it just depends, you know, like we talk a lot about lists and the deck does this, but also your piloting skills come into play quite a bit. So somebody that's very experienced will be able to most likely play around whatever, you know, they have to deal with. So
that's a great point. I think there's some people who like net deck decks, and this is in all formats totally, where people net deck and they just don't know. Like, and I remember back when I was filming modern videos, I filmed this one that was like, know why there are cards in your decks, because so many people would just be like, oh, I'm playing this card. It's like, okay, but like, do you know why? Do you know why you're playing this card over this card? Do you know? And like, sideboarding is really important too, is like, why are you running the card in sideboard? People just like don't know, and I'm like, that's really important, is like knowing how certain cards interact and things like that. So
that's true. And that's something that can't be measured. You know, it simply exists in whatever level it exists in, and it takes practice to get better at what you're doing.
Yeah, absolutely. It all comes down to practice, and I think that was everything I had to say. Chuck, thanks so much for hanging out.
Absolutely. Thanks for coming in, and you know, we'll always love doing videos with you.
Yeah, it's super fun. So subscribe to me if you're not already, like this video, and see you all in the next one. Bye.
Bye.